The rain hammered against the hotel window as I stared at my phone screen, reading the same text message for the 100th time. Mom, I can't help you anymore. Find your own way back. I'm not feeding another mouth when I have my own family to think about. Marcus. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My hands trembled as I set the phone down on the narrow windowsill of this cramped Bangkok hotel room. 3 days ago, I had been Sarah Chen, Senior Marketing Director at Global Tech Solutions, earning 6 figures and living comfortably in my downtown Seattle apartment. Now I was just another stranded tourist in Thailand, with exactly $47 in my wallet and a maxed-out credit card. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had come to Bangkok on what was supposed to be a routine business trip to oversee the launch of our Southeast Asian expansion. Instead, I had walked into a boardroom ambush that ended with security escorting me out of our partner company's building with nothing but my passport and the clothes on my back. The monsoon season had turned Bangkok's streets into rivers, and the humidity made everything stick to my skin like a second layer of clothing. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and watched the chaos below. Tuk-tuks weaved between cars, their drivers seemingly immune to the torrential downpour, while vendors continued hawking their wares under makeshift plastic canopies. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? 2 weeks earlier, I had been sitting in the conference room at Global Tech's Seattle headquarters, presenting my quarterly reports to the executive team. The Southeast Asian market was our next big opportunity, and I had spent 8 months developing relationships with potential partners in Bangkok, Singapore, and Manila. My presentation had been flawless, the projections promising, and CEO Jonathan Morrison had personally congratulated me on securing the Thai partnership. "Sarah, you've outdone yourself," Jonathan had said, his silver hair catching the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. "The Bangkok launch is going to put us on the map in Asia. I want you to personally oversee the transition." I should have known something was wrong when he insisted I travel alone instead of bringing my usual team. Cost-cutting measures, he had explained with that practiced smile that had fooled investors for years. Besides, you know this project better than anyone. The flight to Bangkok had been 17 hours of anticipation. I had reviewed every contract, every presentation slide, every email exchange with Thanawat Industries, our new Thai partner. I had even practiced basic Thai phrases, determined to make a good impression. The future of Global Tech's international expansion rested on this launch, and I wasn't going to let anything go wrong. Thanawat Industries occupied 3 floors of a gleaming tower in Bangkok's Siloam district. Their offices were a testament to Thailand's economic boom, with marble floors, contemporary art, and panoramic views of the city skyline. I had arrived that first Monday morning wearing my best navy suit, carrying a leather briefcase filled with contracts and promotional materials. Siraporn Thanawat, the company's founder and CEO, had greeted me in the lobby with what I thought was genuine warmth. She was a petite woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an elegant presence that commanded respect. We had spoken via video conference dozens of times over the past months, and I felt like I knew her well enough to trust her completely. "Sarah, welcome to Bangkok," she had said, extending her manicured hand. "We are so excited to begin our partnership with Global Tech." The first day had gone smoothly. We toured their facilities, met with department heads, and reviewed the implementation timeline. Everything seemed to be proceeding exactly as planned. Siraporn took me to lunch at an upscale restaurant where we discussed cultural differences and shared stories about our respective industries. I felt confident, accomplished, and excited about the opportunities ahead. "Tomorrow we will have the formal contract signing," Siraporn had said over pad thai and green curry. "My legal team has prepared everything. It will be very straightforward." That night, I had called Marcus from my hotel room, practically glowing with success. My son lived in Portland with his wife Jessica and their 2 young children, working as a software engineer for a startup that seemed to change names every 6 months. The launch is going perfectly, I had told him, pacing around the luxurious suite that Global Tech had booked for me. This partnership is going to transform the company's international presence. I might even get promoted to VP of International Operations. Marcus had sounded distracted, as he often did when I called. That's great, Mom. Listen, I've got to help Jackson with his homework. Can we talk later? It was always something with Marcus. Always a reason to cut our conversations short. Always somewhere else he needed to be. I had learned not to take it personally, though it still stung. After his father died 6 years ago, Marcus had become increasingly distant, building walls I couldn't seem to penetrate. Of course, sweetheart. Give the kids my love. The second day in Bangkok began ominously. When I arrived at Thanawat Industries, the usual bustle of activity in the lobby was replaced by an unsettling quiet. The receptionist avoided eye contact as she directed me to the conference room where Siriporn was waiting. But Siriporn wasn't alone. 3 men in expensive suits sat around the polished table, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable to openly hostile. Legal documents were spread across the surface, and I could see my name highlighted in yellow on several pages. "Sarah, please sit down," Siriporn said, her tone completely different from the day before. Gone was the warmth and enthusiasm, replaced by cold professionalism. "We need to discuss some concerns that have come to our attention." My stomach dropped as I took the offered chair. "What kind of concerns?" One of the men, who introduced himself as Cayman Srisawat from Thanawat's legal department, slid a folder across the table. "We have received some very disturbing information about Global Tech's financial situation and your personal conduct during these negotiations." I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were copies of emails, financial statements, and what appeared to be a detailed report questioning both my authority to negotiate on Global Tech's behalf and the company's ability to meet its contractual obligations. The documents painted a picture of a financially unstable company using deceptive practices to secure international partnerships. "I don't understand," I said, scanning the pages frantically. "These financial reports are completely inaccurate. And these emails? I never sent these emails." Cayman's expression remained impassive. "Are you saying these documents are fabricated?" "I'm saying they don't represent the truth about Global Tech or about my role in these negotiations." My voice was rising despite my efforts to remain calm. "Who provided you with this information?" Siriporn exchanged glances with the legal team. "The information came from someone within your own company. Someone who was concerned about the ethical implications of this partnership." The room seemed to spin around me. Someone at Global Tech had sabotaged the deal, providing false information to destroy months of work. But who? And why? "I need to contact my company immediately," I said, reaching for my phone. "There's obviously been some kind of misunderstanding." "I'm afraid that won't be necessary," Cayman interrupted. "We've already spoken with your CEO, Jonathan Morrison. He confirmed that you were not authorized to make the commitments outlined in our preliminary agreements." The blood drained from my face. "That's impossible. Jonathan personally approved this project. He sent me here." "According to Mr. Morrison, you exceeded your authority and made promises that Global Tech cannot keep. He suggested that you were acting out of desperation to save your position with the company." I sat in stunned silence as the implications sank in. Jonathan had thrown me under the bus, using me as a scapegoat for whatever problems Global Tech was facing. The partnership I had worked so hard to secure was crumbling, and I was being painted as a rogue employee who had acted without authorization. "We cannot proceed with this partnership under these circumstances," Siriporn said, her voice carrying a note of what might have been regret. The trust that is essential for such relationships has been compromised. Please, I said, desperation creeping into my voice. Give me 24 hours to sort this out. Let me contact my company and clarify the situation. But even as I spoke, I knew it was futile. The careful relationships I had built over months had been destroyed in a single meeting. Whatever game Jonathan was playing, I was the expendable piece. Cayman gathered the documents and stood up. We will be sending a formal notice to Global Tech terminating all discussions regarding the partnership. We expect any materials related to Thanawatt Industries to be returned immediately. I handed over my briefcase containing the contracts and promotional materials, feeling like I was surrendering pieces of my professional identity. Without those documents, I had no proof of the work I had done, no evidence of my role in developing the partnership. We will arrange for transportation back to your hotel, Siraporn said, her tone softer now but still distant. We regret that things have worked out this way. The ride back to the hotel was a blur of Bangkok traffic and my own racing thoughts. I tried calling Jonathan Morrison repeatedly, but his assistant claimed he was in meetings and would return my call. I sent urgent emails to my team back in Seattle, but received only automated responses. It wasn't until I was back in my hotel room that I finally reached Rebecca Martinez, my closest colleague, and the only person at Global Tech I truly trusted. Her voice was strained when she answered the phone. Sarah, thank God you called. I've been trying to reach you for hours. Rebecca, what the hell is going on? Thanawatt Industries just terminated our partnership based on information they received from Jonathan. They're saying I wasn't authorized to negotiate the deal. There was a long pause before Rebecca spoke again. Sarah, you need to sit down. The company's been hemorrhaging money for months. The board is demanding massive cost cuts, and Jonathan's been looking for ways to shift blame away from his own decisions. What are you saying? I'm saying you were set up. Jonathan sent you to Bangkok knowing the partnership was going to fail. He needed someone to blame for the company's problems in the Asian market, and you were the perfect candidate. The hotel room felt like it was closing in around me. But the financial projections, the market analysis, everything looked solid when I left Seattle. The numbers were cooked, Sarah. The board discovered discrepancies in Jonathan's reporting just days after you left. Instead of admitting his mistakes, he decided to make it look like you had exceeded your authority and made unrealistic promises to potential partners. I sank onto the hotel bed, phone pressed to my ear. So I'm being fired? It's worse than that. Security cleaned out your office this morning. HR is claiming you violated company policy by entering into unauthorized negotiations with foreign entities. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They're saying you're responsible for the financial losses associated with the failed expansion. The weight of the betrayal was suffocating. After 12 years with Global Tech, after working 60-hour weeks and sacrificing personal relationships, for the company's success, I was being discarded like a broken piece of equipment. What about severance? What about my 401k? Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. They're claiming the violations nullify your severance package. Legal is reviewing whether they can hold you financially responsible for the costs associated with the failed partnerships. I dropped the phone and stared at the ceiling, trying to process the magnitude of my destruction. Not only had I lost my job, but I was potentially facing financial ruin. Worse yet, I was stranded in Bangkok with limited resources and no clear path home. When I picked up the phone again, Rebecca was still there. Sarah, are you okay? I need to get back to Seattle. I need to fight this. I don't think you understand the situation. Jonathan's already released a statement to the AI staff explaining your termination. He's painted you as a rogue employee who went behind the company's back to make deals we couldn't honor. Most people here believe it. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. Colleagues I had worked with for years, people I had mentored and supported, were probably nodding along with Jonathan's lies, relieved that they weren't the ones being sacrificed. "Rebecca, I need you to help me. You know the truth about what happened." "Sarah, I can't. I have 3 kids and a mortgage. If I speak up now, I'll be the next one on the chopping block." Even Rebecca, my closest ally, was abandoning me to save herself. I couldn't blame her, but the isolation was devastating. That first night in Bangkok, after learning about my termination, I had called Marcus in desperation. The time difference meant it was early morning in Portland, and I woke him up. "Mom? What's wrong? Why are you calling so early?" "Marcus, I'm in trouble. I've been fired and I'm stuck in Bangkok with no money to get home." There was a long pause before he responded, and I could hear Jessica's voice in the background, asking what was happening. "What do you mean you're stuck? Can't you just buy a plane ticket?" "They froze my corporate credit card and my personal card is maxed out." "I need help, son. I need you to wire me money for a plane ticket home." Another pause, longer this time. "Mom, I can't just send you thousands of dollars. I don't have that kind of money lying around." "Marcus, please. I'll pay you back as soon as I get home and sort this out." "With what job? You just said you got fired." The coldness in his voice was like a physical blow. "Marcus, I'm your mother. I raised you by myself after your father died. I put you through college, helped you with your first apartment, supported you when you were between jobs. I need your help now." "Mom, that was different. I was young and getting started. You're 52 years old. You should have savings for emergencies like this." "I do have savings, but they're all tied up in investments and retirement accounts. I can't access them immediately, especially from here." I could hear him talking to Jessica in muffled tones, and then he came back on the line. "Look, Mom, we've got our own problems right now. Jessica's pregnant again, and we're already struggling to make ends meet with 2 kids. I can't be responsible for bailing out everyone in the family." "Everyone in the family? Marcus, I'm the only family you have left. That's not fair. Jessica and the kids are my family now. My responsibility is to them, not to you." The words hit me like a physical assault. After everything I had sacrificed for him, after all the years of putting his needs before my own, he was cutting me loose at the first sign of trouble. "Marcus, I'm not asking you to support me indefinitely. I just need help getting home so I can figure out what to do next." "Figure it out yourself, Mom. You're a smart woman. You'll find a way." And then he hung up. I stared at the phone for a long time, unable to believe what had just happened. My only child, the person I had devoted my life to raising and supporting, had abandoned me in my darkest hour. The pain was worse than losing my job, worse than being betrayed by Jonathan Morrison, worse than being stranded in a foreign country. Over the next 2 days, I tried calling other contacts, other potential sources of help. But my professional network had evaporated along with my reputation. Former colleagues were suddenly unavailable or claimed they couldn't help. Friends from Seattle expressed sympathy, but offered only empty promises of assistance. I had built my entire identity around my career and my role as Marcus's mother. Without the job and with my son's rejection still echoing in my ears, I felt utterly lost. The luxury hotel room that Global Tech had booked became a prison as I watched my credit card reach its limit and my cash reserves dwindle. On the 3rd day, I had to check out of the expensive hotel and find cheaper accommodations. The transition from the 5-star property to a budget guest house in Bangkok's backpacker district was jarring. My new room was barely large enough for a twin bed and a small table, with a shared bathroom down the hall and no air conditioning. It was in that cramped, sweltering room that I received Marcus's final text message. The one I had been reading over and over as the rain pounded against the window. "Mom, I can't help you anymore. Find your own way back. I'm not feeding another mouth when I have my own family to think about." The cruelty of those words, "I'm not feeding another mouth," reduced me to something less than human in his eyes. I wasn't his mother who had worked 3 jobs to pay for his college tuition. I wasn't the woman who had sat up all night when he was sick, or who had taught him to drive, or who had celebrated every achievement in his life. I was just another mouth to feed, a burden he could discard without a second thought. That night, as Bangkok's neon lights flickered through the thin curtains and the sounds of the street market filtered up from below, I realized that I had reached the absolute bottom. 52 years old, unemployed, nearly broke, and abandoned by the only person I thought would always be there for me. But as I lay on that narrow bed, listening to the rhythm of the rain, something unexpected began to stir inside me. It wasn't hope exactly, but it wasn't despair either. It was something harder, more determined, a voice that whispered that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of my story. I had always been the one who fixed things, who solved problems, who took care of everyone else. Now, for the first time in my adult life, I had no choice but to take care of myself. The question was whether I had the strength to do it. As I drifted off to sleep that night, images from my past began to surface. Memories of challenges I had overcome, obstacles I had navigated, moments when I had been stronger than I thought possible. Tomorrow, I would have to find a way to survive in this foreign city with less than $40 to my name. But tonight, in the darkness of that tiny room, I began to remember who I had been before I became defined by my job and my role as a mother. I began to remember Sarah Chen, the woman who had immigrated to America with nothing but determination and a fierce will to succeed. The woman who had worked her way through college while raising a baby alone. The woman who had built a successful career from the ground up through sheer force of will and relentless hard work. That woman was still inside me somewhere, buried under years of corporate expectations and maternal sacrifice, and if I was going to survive what came next, I was going to have to find her again. The rain continued to fall outside, washing the streets of Bangkok clean for whatever tomorrow might bring. In 12 hours, I would have to check out of this guest house and find an even cheaper place to stay. I would have to figure out how to eat, how to survive, how to eventually find my way home. But I wouldn't be doing it as the broken woman who had arrived in Bangkok 3 days ago. I would be doing it as someone who was just beginning to understand that losing everything might be the first step toward finding out who she really was. The story of my destruction was ending. The story of my rebirth was about to begin. The morning sun streaming through the thin curtains felt like mockery against my skin as I counted the remaining bills in my wallet. $23.47. That was all that stood between me and complete destitution in a city where I didn't speak the language and had no connections. I had spent the night creating a mental inventory of everything I owned. The clothes in my small suitcase, my laptop computer, a few pieces of jewelry including my wedding ring from my late husband, and my smartphone with its rapidly depleting international data plan. None of it seemed substantial enough to build a survival plan around. The guest house owner, an elderly Thai woman named Ploy, knocked on my door at precisely 9 a.m. Her English was limited, but her message was clear. I needed to pay for another night or find somewhere else to stay. "Lady, you pay now, or you go," she said, holding out her weathered hand expectantly. I handed over $15, leaving me with barely enough money for food. As she counted the bills, I caught a glimpse of compassion in her eyes that made me wonder if my desperation was written across my face for everyone to see. "You okay, lady? You have problem?" Her broken English carried genuine concern, and for a moment I considered unburdening myself to this stranger. But what could I possibly say that would make sense? That I had been one of Seattle's rising business executives just a week ago? That my own son had abandoned me when I needed him most? "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just some travel complications." Ploy nodded skeptically but didn't press further. After she left, I sat on the narrow bed and opened my laptop, determined to find some solution to my predicament. The Wi-Fi connection was painfully slow, but I managed to access my email accounts and begin reaching out to anyone who might be able to help. I crafted careful messages to former colleagues, college friends, and distant relatives, explaining my situation in vague terms that didn't reveal the full extent of my humiliation. I told them about unexpected travel difficulties and asked for short-term financial assistance to get home. Each email felt like swallowing my pride, but desperation had a way of making such choices easier. The responses, when they came, were disappointingly predictable. Most people expressed sympathy but claimed they couldn't help with money. A few offered advice about contacting the American Embassy or suggested I look into emergency travel loans. Nobody offered the concrete assistance I desperately needed. By afternoon, my stomach was growling loudly enough to make concentration impossible. I ventured out onto the busy street where vendors were selling food from colorful carts and small stalls. The aromas were intoxicating, but even the cheapest. Meals seemed expensive when measured against my remaining $8. I bought a small portion of pad thai from a street vendor for $2, savoring each bite while watching the organized chaos of Bangkok life swirl around me. Office workers in crisp shirts hurried past on their way to air-conditioned buildings. Tourists with cameras and guidebooks explored the markets, and elderly locals sat in the shade playing cards and drinking tea. Everyone seemed to belong somewhere, to have a purpose and a destination. I was the only one who appeared completely displaced. A woman in wrinkled business clothes clutching a cheap meal while trying to make $6 last until tomorrow. That evening, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. I needed to find work, any kind of work, to survive long enough to figure out how to get home. The idea of taking a job in Bangkok while still hoping to salvage my career in Seattle felt like admitting defeat, but pride was a luxury I could no longer afford. I spent hours researching opportunities for English speakers in Bangkok. Teaching English was the most obvious option, but legitimate schools required work permits and teaching certificates I didn't possess. Freelance translation work existed, but paid very little and required connections I didn't have. It was while scrolling through online job boards that I stumbled across something unexpected. A posting for a business consultant position at a small import-export company caught my attention. The job description was vague, but they were specifically looking for someone with experience in American business practices and international trade. The company was called Pacific Bridge Trading, and their website showed a modest operation specializing in connecting Thai manufacturers with American retailers. The owner, according to the site, was an American expatriate named David Walsh, who had been living in Bangkok for over a decade. I crafted a careful email explaining my background in international business development and my temporary availability while handling family matters in Thailand. I emphasized my recent experience with Southeast Asian markets and my understanding of cross-cultural business practices. It wasn't entirely dishonest, though it certainly glossed over the circumstances that had brought me there. To my surprise, David Walsh responded within hours, suggesting we meet the following afternoon at his office in Bangkok's Chinatown district. His email was brief but professional, mentioning that he had been looking for someone with my background for months. That night, I used precious dollars to have my business clothes professionally cleaned at a nearby laundry service. If I was going to present myself as a competent business consultant, I needed to look the part, even if my confidence had been shattered. The next morning brought another harsh reality check. I had enough money left for either breakfast or transportation to the interview, but not both. I chose transportation, hoping that professional opportunity might be worth the discomfort of hunger. Pacific Bridge Trading occupied a narrow 3-story building squeezed between a traditional medicine shop and a restaurant specializing in duck noodles. The building was old but well-maintained, with modern glass doors that seemed somewhat out of place among the traditional storefronts. David Walsh turned out to be a man in his early 50s with sun-weathered skin and the relaxed demeanor of someone who had fully adapted to Thai culture. His office was a fascinating blend of American efficiency and Southeast Asian aesthetics, with modern computers sitting alongside traditional Thai artwork. "Sarah, thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "I have to admit, your email intrigued me. It's not often I find someone with your level of experience who's available for project work." I settled into the chair, hoping my empty stomach wouldn't betray me with audible protests. I'm in a unique situation where I have some flexibility in my schedule. The opportunity to work with a company like yours appealed to me. David leaned back in his chair, studying me with intelligent eyes. "Tell me about your experience with Thanawat Industries. I saw they were working on a partnership with Global Tech Solutions, but I heard it fell through." My heart sank. Of course he would know about the failed partnership. Bangkok's business community was probably smaller and more interconnected than I had realized. "The partnership didn't work out as planned," I said carefully. "There were some miscommunications about expectations and capabilities." "Miscommunications?" David repeated with a slight smile. "That's a diplomatic way to put it. I heard Siraporn Thanawat was pretty upset about the whole situation." I felt heat rising in my cheeks. "What exactly did you hear?" "Nothing too specific. Just that there were questions about authorization and some concerns about Global Tech's financial stability. Siraporn mentioned they felt they had been misled about the scope of the partnership." The moment of truth had arrived. I could continue trying to gloss over what had happened, hoping David didn't know the full story, or I could take a calculated risk and tell him something closer to the truth. "David, I'm going to be honest with you because I think you deserve that. I was sent to Bangkok to finalize a partnership that my company had already decided to sabotage. They used me as a scapegoat for their own financial problems and hung me out to dry. I lost my job, my reputation took a hit, and I'm currently figuring out my next steps." David raised an eyebrow, but didn't seem shocked by my revelation. "That's refreshingly honest. Most people in your situation would have tried to spin it differently. Most people in my situation probably have better options than being completely transparent with a potential employer." He laughed at that, a genuine sound that seemed to ease some of the tension in the room. "Fair enough. So what are you really looking for here, Sarah? Because I get the impression this isn't just about finding project work." I took a deep breath, realizing I had nothing left to lose by being completely honest. "I need work that pays enough to survive while I figure out how to rebuild my life. I'm good at what I do. I have valuable skills and experience, but right now I'm basically starting over with almost nothing." David nodded slowly, as if my situation made perfect sense to him. "You know, some of the best people I've worked with over the years have been folks who ended up in Bangkok under less than ideal circumstances. There's something about having your back against the wall that brings out either the best or the worst in people." "And which category do you think I fall into?" "Well, you're here, aren't you? You're not sitting in a hotel room feeling sorry for yourself or begging family members to rescue you. You're looking for ways to solve your own problems. That tells me something about your character." His words hit me harder than I expected. For days, I had been defining myself by what I had lost, rather than by what I was doing to move forward. The simple recognition that I was fighting back instead of giving up felt like the first positive feedback I had received in weeks. "I have a proposition for you," David continued. "I've been looking for someone to help me expand our operations into new markets. Not just American markets, but potentially European and Australian ones as well. It would involve traveling throughout Southeast Asia, identifying potential suppliers, and building relationships with manufacturers." My pulse quickened. It sounded like exactly the kind of work I was qualified for, the kind of work I had been doing successfully for years. "The pay isn't going to match what you were probably making in Seattle," David continued, "but it's enough to live comfortably in Bangkok and build up some savings. More importantly, it's the kind of experience that could open doors for you down the road, whether you decide to stay in Asia or eventually return to the States. What kind of timeline are we talking about? I'd want to start with a 3-month trial period. If it works out for both of us, we could discuss something more permanent. The work would be challenging but rewarding, and you'd have a lot of autonomy to develop new business relationships. It wasn't the rescue I had been hoping for, but it was something far more valuable. An opportunity to prove myself and rebuild my professional identity on my own terms. Working for Pacific Bridge Trading wouldn't erase what had happened with global tech, but it could provide a foundation for whatever came next. "I'm interested," I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "What would you need from me to get started?" "Honestly, just your commitment and your expertise. I can handle the work permit paperwork, and we can start with some smaller projects while that gets processed. There's actually a manufacturer in Chiang Mai I've been wanting to visit next week. Would you be available to accompany me on that trip?" The irony wasn't lost on me. A week ago, I had been a senior executive at a major corporation, and now I was grateful for the opportunity to travel to northern Thailand with a small import-export business. But David Walsh was offering me something Marcus had refused to provide: a chance to earn my way forward instead of being treated like a charity case. "Yes, I'm available," I said, shaking his outstretched hand. "Excellent. Why don't you plan to start Monday? That'll give you a few days to get settled and familiarize yourself with our current operations." As I walked back through the busy streets of Chinatown, I felt something I hadn't experienced since arriving in Bangkok. Hope. Not the desperate hope that someone would rescue me, but the more substantial hope that comes from having a plan and the means to execute it. That evening, I celebrated by buying a proper meal instead of surviving on street snacks. As I sat in a small restaurant eating green curry and jasmine rice, I reflected on how much my perspective had changed in just a few days. The woman who had arrived in Bangkok expecting to close a major corporate deal was gone, but the woman who was emerging in her place might actually be stronger. I thought about calling Marcus to tell him about the job opportunity, but stopped myself. His rejection had been complete and final. If I was going to rebuild my life, it would have to be on my own terms, without depending on anyone who had already made it clear they weren't willing to help. Instead, I opened my laptop and began researching Pacific Bridge Trading's current partnerships and potential expansion opportunities. If I was going to prove myself worthy of David Walsh's faith in me, I needed to understand every aspect of the business and identify ways to add immediate value. Working late into the night in that cramped guest house room, surrounded by the sounds of Bangkok's nightlife filtering through thin walls, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Excitement about the future, not the comfortable excitement of career advancement within an established company, but the thrilling uncertainty of building something new from the ground up. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and research. I met with David twice, more to discuss Pacific Bridge Trading's operations and the specific challenges they faced in expanding their market reach. I learned about the complexities of Thai manufacturing, the importance of personal relationships in Southeast Asian business culture, and the opportunities that existed for companies willing to invest time in building trust with local partners. David's approach to business was refreshingly different from the corporate environment I was used to. He emphasized long-term relationships over short-term profits, cultural sensitivity over aggressive sales tactics, and patience over the pressure for immediate results. It was a more sustainable way of conducting international business, though it required a completely different mindset from what I had practiced at Global Tech. The key to success in this region, David explained during one of our planning sessions, is understanding that trust is the foundation of everything. Americans often want to rush to contracts and legal documents, but here, people need to know who you are as a person before they'll do business with you. His words resonated with me in ways I hadn't expected. My failure with Thanawat Industries, had been partly due to my assumption that professional credentials and corporate backing were sufficient to establish credibility. I had focused on the technical aspects of the partnership, while neglecting the personal relationships that made such agreements possible. On Friday evening, as I prepared for my new role at Pacific Bridge Trading, I received an unexpected email that made me question everything I thought I understood about my situation. The message was from Rebecca Martinez, my former colleague at Global Tech. "Sarah, I hope you're doing okay. I wanted to let you know about some developments here that you should be aware of. Jonathan Morrison was terminated yesterday. The board discovered he had been embezzling company funds and manipulating financial reports to cover his tracks. The partnership failures in Asia were apparently part of a larger pattern of financial misconduct." I stared at the screen, trying to process what Rebecca was telling me. Jonathan Morrison, the man who had destroyed my career and reputation, had been caught in his own web of deception. "Several of us have been interviewed by investigators," the email continued. "I told them about your work on the Thanawat partnership and how you were set up to take the blame for Jonathan's failures. There might be opportunities for you to clear your name and possibly pursue legal action for wrongful termination." The vindication should have felt satisfying, but instead I found myself strangely detached from the news. A week ago, learning about Jonathan's downfall would have been the answer to all my problems. Now, it felt like information about someone else's life, relevant to a version of myself that no longer existed. I closed the laptop without responding to Rebecca's email. Whatever legal remedies might be available to me, whatever opportunities might exist to return to my old life, they belonged to Sarah Chen, the corporate executive. The woman I was becoming had different priorities and different definitions of success. That night, I packed my few belongings and checked out of the guest house where I had spent the most challenging week of my adult life. David had arranged for me to stay in a modest but comfortable apartment near Pacific Bridge Trading's office, a gesture of confidence that meant more to me than any corporate signing bonus ever had. As I walked through Bangkok streets with my suitcase, heading toward whatever came next, I thought about the text message from Marcus that had seemed like the end of the world just days earlier. "I'm not feeding another mouth," he had written, reducing me to a burden he couldn't be bothered to carry. He was right, I realized. He wasn't feeding another mouth because I was perfectly capable of feeding myself. What he had meant as a cruel dismissal had accidentally become a declaration of independence. By refusing to help me, he had forced me to discover that I didn't need his help after all. The apartment David had found for me was small but clean, with a kitchenette and a balcony overlooking a quiet street lined with food stalls and small shops. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine, earned through my own efforts rather than given out of obligation or charity. I stood on the balcony that first night, listening to the sounds of the city settling into evening rhythm, and realized that somewhere in the process of losing everything, I had found something I hadn't even known I was looking for. For the first time in years, possibly for the first time since my husband died, I was living entirely for myself. The work at Pacific Bridge Trading would be challenging, the pay modest, and the future uncertain. But it would be my work, my challenge, my future. No one could take it away from me because I hadn't been given it as a favor or inherited it as an obligation. I had earned it through my own competence and determination. Sunday morning, I woke up early and made coffee in my new kitchenette, watching the sunrise paint Bangkok's skyline in shades of gold and pink. Tomorrow, I would begin the next chapter of my life, working for a company that valued my skills and trusted my judgment. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was the life I was building for myself. I thought about calling Marcus to tell him I was okay, that I had figured things out on my own just as he had suggested. But something held me back. His rejection had been so complete, so final, that reaching out now felt like begging for approval I no longer needed. Instead, I opened my laptop and began preparing for my first day at Pacific Bridge Trading. There were manufacturers to research, market opportunities to analyze, and relationships to build. The work was familiar, but the context was entirely new, requiring me to adapt everything I knew about business to a different culture and different set of expectations. As I worked, I found myself thinking about the woman who had arrived in Bangkok just over a week ago, the woman who had measured her worth by her corporate title and her son's approval. That woman had been successful by many measures, but she had also been fragile, dependent on external validation, and unprepared for the reality that both career success and family relationships could disappear without warning. The woman I was becoming was different. She was building her life on foundations that couldn't be taken away by corporate politics or family rejection. She was discovering that survival required not just professional skills, but personal resilience. Not just the ability to make money, but the ability to create meaning and purpose even when everything familiar had been stripped away. By Monday morning, I was ready to walk into Pacific Bridge Trading's office, not as someone seeking rescue, but as someone bringing value and expertise to a growing business. The transformation from corporate executive to independent consultant hadn't been planned, but it had been necessary. As I headed out to begin my new job, I passed a street vendor selling jasmine flowers to passers-by. On impulse, I bought a small bouquet. Not for any particular reason, except that they were beautiful and I could afford them. It was a small gesture of abundance in the midst of uncertainty, a reminder that even when starting over, there was room for beauty and spontaneous joy. The flowers sat on my desk that first day at Pacific Bridge Trading, filling the small office with their delicate fragrance as I began to build the next phase of my life. Outside the window, Bangkok pulsed with its endless energy, and somewhere in that vast city of possibilities, the woman I was becoming was just getting started. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of the Bangkok International Trade Center, adjusting the collar of my tailored navy blazer and checking my watch. The woman reflected in the polished marble surfaces bore little resemblance to the desperate, broken person who had arrived in Thailand with $23 and a shattered sense of self-worth. Pacific Bridge Trading had exceeded every expectation David Walsh and I had set when I first walked into his Chinatown office. Our expansion into European markets had secured partnerships with manufacturers across 3 countries, and our Australian operations were generating revenue that surprised even David's optimistic projections. More importantly, I had discovered a passion for international business that went far beyond corporate advancement or financial gain. Today marked a significant milestone. I was attending the Asian Trade Summit as a featured speaker, invited to present a case study on building sustainable partnerships between Western retailers and Southeast Asian manufacturers. The irony wasn't lost on me that I would be sharing the stage with several executives from companies that had once been my peers at Global Tech. As I walked toward the conference registration desk, a familiar voice called my name from across the bustling lobby. "Sarah Chen? Is that really you?" I turned to see Siraporn Thanawat approaching, her expression a mixture of surprise and curiosity. She looked exactly as I remembered from our disastrous meetings months earlier, impeccably dressed and radiating the confidence that came from running a successful multinational corporation. "Siraporn, what a pleasant surprise," I said, extending my hand with genuine warmth. "I hope you're well." She shook my hand, studying my face as if trying to reconcile this composed woman with the desperate corporate representative she had dismissed from her office. "I must admit, I was shocked to see your name on the speaker list. The last time we met..." She paused diplomatically. "The last time we met, I was representing a company that was using me as a scapegoat for their own failures," I finished, calmly. "I believe you've heard about Jonathan Morrison's legal troubles." Siraporn nodded slowly. "Indeed. When the news broke about Global Tech's financial misconduct, I realized we may have misjudged the situation entirely. I owe you an apology, Sarah." "You don't owe me anything. You made the right decision for your company based on the information you had. That's exactly what a responsible CEO should do." Her eyebrows rose slightly at my response. "You're remarkably gracious about what must have been a very difficult situation. Difficult situations have a way of revealing unexpected opportunities, I replied. I'm much happier with my current path than I ever was climbing the corporate ladder at Global Tech. Before Siraporn could respond, another voice interrupted our conversation. Well, if it isn't Sarah Chen, the infamous rogue executive. I turned to see Daniel Crawford, a former colleague from Global Tech's international division, approaching with a smirk that I remembered all too well. Daniel had always been ambitious to the point of ruthlessness, and his presence at the trade summit suggested he had landed on his feet after Global Tech's implosion. Daniel, I said evenly, still charming as ever, I see. I have to say, I was surprised to hear you'd managed to salvage some kind of career after the Thanawat debacle. What are you doing these days? Consulting work? His tone carried the same condescending note I remembered from countless corporate meetings, the assumption that anyone working outside a major corporation was somehow less successful or important. Actually, I'm the director of international development for Pacific Bridge Trading, I replied. We've been quite successful in markets that larger corporations often overlook. Daniel's smirk faltered slightly. Pacific Bridge? I'm not familiar with that company. You wouldn't be. We focus on sustainable, long-term partnerships rather than short-term profit extraction. It's a different approach than what you're probably used to. Siraporn watched our exchange with obvious interest, and I could see her reassessing everything she thought she knew about my professional capabilities. Sarah will be presenting this afternoon on innovative partnership models, she interjected. I'm very much looking forward to her insights. Daniel's expression shifted from condescension to confusion as he realized that Siraporn Thanawat, one of Thailand's most respected business leaders, was treating me as a peer rather than a corporate casualty. Partnership models, he repeated, clearly struggling to process this information. Well, I suppose someone has to handle the smaller accounts. Actually, I said with a smile, our smaller accounts generated over $15 million in revenue last quarter. But you're right that we focus on quality relationships rather than volume. The number hung in the air between us. $15 million wasn't massive by global tech standards, but for a company that had been virtually unknown a year ago, it represented extraordinary growth and success. Daniel's smirk disappeared entirely. $15 million? In a quarter? Conservative growth, I replied. We prefer to build sustainable revenue streams rather than chase quarterly spikes that aren't maintainable. Siraporn nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of thinking our industry needs more of. Too many companies focus on immediate returns without considering long-term impact. Speaking of long-term impact, I said, turning to Siraporn, I'd love to discuss some opportunities for collaboration between Thanawat Industries and our manufacturing partners. We've developed some innovative supply chain models that might interest you. Daniel stood there looking increasingly uncomfortable as Siraporn and I began discussing potential business partnerships. The conversation was casual but substantive. The kind of high-level strategic discussion that he had probably expected to dominate at this conference. Sarah, would you have time for coffee later today? Siraporn asked. I'd like to hear more about your work with Pacific Bridge. I'd be delighted. Shall we say 4 o'clock at the coffee shop on the 3rd floor? Perfect. I look forward to it. As Siraporn walked away, Daniel stared after her with obvious frustration. I can't believe she's taking you seriously. Everyone knows what happened with Global Tech. What happened with Global Tech was that Jonathan Morrison was embezzling money and using employees like me to cover his tracks, I replied calmly. The FBI investigation made that quite clear. Still, your reputation in the industry. My reputation in the industry is that I build successful partnerships and generate sustainable revenue for my clients. That's the only reputation that matters to me now. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the arrival of another familiar face. This one made my stomach clench with a different kind of recognition. Mom? What are you doing? Here? Marcus stood frozen in the registration line, staring at me with an expression of complete shock. He was wearing an expensive suit that I didn't recognize, and his hair was styled differently than I remembered. He looked older, more mature, but his eyes still held the same distant coldness that had characterized our last conversation. "Hello, Marcus," I said, my voice steady despite the emotional turmoil his presence created. "I'm here for the conference. I'm presenting this afternoon." "Presenting? About what?" "International Business Development and Sustainable Partnership. Models." Marcus looked around as if expecting someone to explain this unexpected encounter. "I don't understand. Last time we talked, you were stranded in Bangkok with no job and no money." "That was 6 months ago," I replied. "Things change." Daniel, sensing drama, lingered nearby with obvious interest. Siraporn had moved toward the elevator, but I could see her watching our interaction with curious concern. "You never called to tell me you were okay," Marcus said, his voice carrying a note of accusation. "You made it very clear that my problems weren't your responsibility. I respected that and solved them myself." The words came out more coldly than I had intended, but I felt no urge to soften them. Marcus had made his position clear when I needed him most, and I wasn't going to pretend that his rejection hadn't happened. "Mom, that's not fair. I was going through my own difficulties at the time. And I was going through mine. The difference is that I didn't expect you to solve them for me." A tall man in his 30s approached Marcus from the registration desk, extending a conference badge toward him. "Your badge, Mr. Chen. Are you ready for the presentation rehearsal?" Marcus took the badge without looking away from me. "Actually, Tom, I'd like you to meet my mother. Mom, this is Tom Rodriguez, my business partner." Tom extended his hand with a professional smile. "Mrs. Chen, it's a pleasure to meet you. Marcus has told me so much about you." I shook his hand while processing this new information. Business partner. Marcus had a business partner and was apparently presenting at the same conference where I was speaking. "What kind of business are you in?" I asked Tom, though my eyes remained on Marcus. "We develop software solutions for international supply chain management," Tom replied enthusiastically. "Marcus and I started the company about 8 months ago, and we've been incredibly successful." 8 months ago, right around the time I had been stranded in Bangkok, asking for his help. While I had been counting my last $23, Marcus had been launching a new business venture. That's wonderful," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I hope your presentation goes well." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "We're presenting on using technology to streamline international trade relationships. It's actually quite relevant to your work, apparently." "Apparently," I agreed. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken history. Tom looked back and forth between us, clearly sensing tension but uncertain about its source. "Well," Tom said finally, "we should probably get to that rehearsal. The presentation is right after lunch." "Of course," Marcus said, but he didn't move. "Mom, maybe we could talk later, after your presentation?" I considered his request carefully. 6 months ago, I would have jumped at any opportunity to reconnect with my son. Now, I found myself weighing whether that conversation would add value to my life or simply rehash old wounds. "I'm quite busy today," I said finally. "Coffee meetings, networking sessions, the usual conference activities." "Tomorrow then? Before you fly back to Seattle?" "I'm not flying back to Seattle. I live in Bangkok now." The surprise on Marcus's face was almost comical. "You live there? Permanently?" "Yes. I have a life there, a career there, friends there. Bangkok is my home now." This revelation seemed to shake Marcus more than anything else we had discussed. The idea that his mother had not only survived her crisis, but had thrived enough to relocate permanently to another country clearly hadn't occurred to him. "But what about your life in Seattle? Your friends? Your house?" Everything? What about them? You made it clear that maintaining relationships wasn't a priority when things get difficult. I learned from your example. The barb hit its mark. Marcus flinched as if I had slapped him, and Tom looked increasingly uncomfortable with the conversation. Maybe we should continue this discussion later, Tom suggested diplomatically. Actually, I said, I think we've said what needed to be said. Marcus, I hope your presentation goes well. Tom, it was nice meeting you. I turned to walk away, but Marcus caught my arm gently. Mom, please. I know I made mistakes. Let me explain what was happening in my life back then. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then met his eyes directly. Marcus, explanations are for people who care about the outcome. I've moved past caring about why you abandoned me when I needed help. I'm focused on building relationships with people who show up when things get difficult. The hurt in his eyes was unmistakable, but I felt surprisingly little satisfaction in causing it. Revenge wasn't what I wanted anymore. I simply wanted to live my life surrounded by people who valued and supported me, and Marcus had demonstrated conclusively that he wasn't one of those people. Sarah Chen? I turned to see a young woman with a conference badge and a tablet approaching us. I'm Jennifer Wu from the conference organizing committee. We're ready to do your sound check for this afternoon's presentation. Perfect timing, I said, grateful for the interruption. I'll be right there. I followed Jennifer toward the main auditorium, leaving Marcus standing in the lobby with his business partner and his obvious regret. As we walked, Jennifer chattered enthusiastically about the expected audience for my presentation and the interest my topic had generated among conference attendees. We've had several requests for copies of your slides, she said. Apparently, your approach to sustainable partnerships is exactly what a lot of companies are looking for right now. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Here I was, being celebrated for expertise I had developed only after losing everything and being forced to rebuild from scratch. The knowledge and insights that made me valuable as a speaker had been earned through failure, rejection, and the necessity of creating something entirely new. The sound check went smoothly, and I spent the afternoon attending other presentations while mentally preparing for my own. The conference was impressive, filled with genuine industry leaders and innovative thinkers. Being included in this group felt like a validation of how far I had come, but more importantly, it felt like confirmation that I belonged in this new version of my professional life. At 4 o'clock, I met Siraporn for coffee as planned. She had brought 2 colleagues with her, both senior executives at Thanawat Industries who were interested in exploring new partnership opportunities. Sarah, I've been thinking about our conversation this morning, Siraporn said as we settled around a small table overlooking the Bangkok skyline. I believe there might be significant opportunities for collaboration between our companies. We spent the next hour discussing potential partnerships, supply chain innovations, and market expansion strategies. The conversation was intellectually stimulating and professionally productive, exactly the kind of high-level strategic discussion that I had missed during my corporate career. Your approach to relationship building is refreshing, said Kritsada Vongsa, one of Siraporn's colleagues. Most Western companies want to rush to contracts without investing time in understanding our business culture. Building trust takes time, I replied, but it creates partnerships that survive market fluctuations and competitive pressures. Pacific Bridge Trading has found that patience in the relationship-building phase pays dividends for years. This is exactly the kind of thinking we need more of in our industry, Siraporn agreed. Sarah, I'd like to propose something. Would you consider developing a comprehensive partnership proposal for Thanawat Industries? Something we could implement over the next 12 to 18 months? The request was significant, potentially worth millions in revenue for Pacific Bridge Trading, and a major validation of my approach to international business. I'd be very interested in exploring that opportunity, I said. Let me discuss it with David Walsh and get back to you with a timeline. We exchanged business cards and agreed to schedule a follow-up meeting the following week. As I watched Siriporn and her colleagues walk away, I marveled at how dramatically my relationship with Thanawat Industries had changed. 6 months ago, Siriporn had essentially thrown me out of her office. Now she was proposing a major business partnership. The transformation wasn't magic or luck. It was the result of hard work, professional growth, and the credibility that came from building successful relationships with other partners. I had earned this opportunity through competence and consistency, not through corporate politics or family connections. My presentation that afternoon went exceptionally well. The auditorium was packed with executives, entrepreneurs, and industry analysts, all eager to hear about innovative approaches to international partnerships. I spoke about the importance of cultural sensitivity, the value of long-term relationship building, and the sustainable growth that resulted from prioritizing trust over short-term profits. During the question and answer session, several audience members asked for specific examples of how these principles had worked in practice. I shared stories about Pacific Bridge Trading's partnerships, the challenges we had overcome, and the revenue growth we had achieved through patient, relationship-focused business development. "Ms. Chen," asked a woman from the audience, "your approach requires significant upfront investment in time and travel without guaranteed returns. How do you justify that to stakeholders who want immediate results?" "The justification comes from the results," I replied. "Our partnerships generate steady, predictable revenue because they're built on mutual trust and shared success. Companies that focus only on immediate returns often find themselves constantly searching for new partners because their existing relationships aren't sustainable." The applause that followed was enthusiastic and sustained. As I left the stage, several conference attendees approached me with business cards and requests for follow-up meetings. It was clear that my presentation had resonated with people who were looking for alternatives to traditional corporate approaches to international business. Among the group waiting to speak with me was Daniel Crawford, the former global tech colleague who had been so dismissive earlier in the day. "Sarah, that was an impressive presentation," he said, his tone notably different from our morning conversation. "I had no idea you had developed such sophisticated partnership strategies." "Thank you, Daniel. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you're not constrained by corporate bureaucracy and short-term thinking. Listen, I'm working with a consulting firm now that specializes in Asian market entry. Would you be interested in discussing some collaboration opportunities?" The request was professionally reasonable, but something about Daniel's sudden interest in working with me felt opportunistic rather than genuine. "I appreciate the thought," I said diplomatically, "but Pacific Bridge Trading is quite selective about our partnerships. We work only with companies that share our values and long-term approach." Daniel nodded, though I could see disappointment in his expression. "Of course. Well, if you ever change your mind, here's my card." I accepted the card politely, knowing I would never call him. Daniel represented everything I had learned to avoid in business relationships: people who were interested in what you could do for them rather than what you could build together. As the conference began to wind down, I found myself standing alone on the terrace outside the main auditorium, watching the sun set over Bangkok's skyline. The city spread out, below me in all directions, a sprawling metropolis that had become my unlikely home and the foundation of my new life. My phone buzzed with a text message from David Walsh. "Heard your presentation was fantastic. Siriporn Thanawat called to discuss partnership opportunities. Great work." I smiled, feeling a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with external validation and everything to do with the knowledge that I had built something meaningful from the wreckage of my old life. "Sarah?" I turned to see Marcus approaching hesitantly, his conference badge still hanging around his neck. He looked younger somehow, less confident than he had appeared in the lobby that morning. "Marcus, how did your presentation go?" "It went well. Thank you. Tom thinks we made some valuable connections." He paused, looking out over the city. I wanted to apologize for this morning. I was caught off guard seeing you here. It's understandable. I imagine this wasn't how you expected to encounter your mother. Marcus winced at my formal tone. Mom, can we please talk? Really talk? I know I handled things badly when you were in trouble, but there were circumstances you didn't know about. I studied his face, seeing genuine remorse but also the same underlying assumption that had always characterized our relationship, that I existed primarily to understand and forgive him, regardless of how his actions had affected me. What? Circumstances? I asked, more out of curiosity than any hope for reconciliation. Jessica was threatening to leave me. She said I was too dependent on family, that I needed to learn to handle problems without always running to you for help or advice. When you called asking for money, she said it was a test of whether I was ready to put my immediate family first. The explanation was both better and worse than I had imagined. Better because it suggested his rejection hadn't been purely selfish. Worse because it revealed how completely he had accepted Jessica's characterization of our relationship. And you agreed with her assessment? Marcus looked uncomfortable. I thought maybe she had a point. You had always been so capable, so independent. I figured you would find a way to handle the situation on your own. I did find a way to handle it on my own. The question is why you thought that was your decision to make. What do you mean? I mean that you decided I was too dependent on family without asking how I felt about it. You decided I was too capable to need help without considering that even capable people sometimes face situations beyond their immediate resources. You made decisions about our relationship based on Jessica's opinions rather than your own judgment or values. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing what I had said. You're right. I should have handled it differently. Yes, you should have. But more importantly, you should understand why it doesn't matter anymore. What do you mean it doesn't matter? I turned to face him fully, looking into eyes that held so much of his father's gentle nature, but had somehow developed a coldness that his father had never possessed. Marcus, 6 months ago, your approval and support meant everything to me. I measured my worth as a mother by how much you needed me and valued our relationship. Your rejection almost destroyed me, not just financially, but emotionally. Mom, I never meant... Let me finish. The woman who needed your approval so desperately doesn't exist anymore. She was replaced by someone who learned to value herself, based on her own accomplishments and the relationships she builds with people who show up consistently. That woman doesn't need your apology because she's not defined by your opinion of her. Marcus stared at me as if I had become a completely different person, which in many ways I had. So there's no chance for us to rebuild our relationship? That depends entirely on what kind of relationship you want to build and whether you're willing to earn it. What do you mean? I mean that any relationship we have going forward would be between equals, not between a mother who sacrifices everything for her child's happiness and a son who takes that sacrifice for granted. Not between someone who needs approval and someone who grants or withholds it based on convenience. I don't understand what you're asking for. I'm not asking for anything, Marcus. I'm explaining the only terms on which I'm interested in having a relationship with you. Mutual respect, consistent support, and genuine interest in each other's lives and well-being. Marcus nodded slowly, though I could see he was struggling to understand this new dynamic. Would you be willing to try? To build that kind of relationship? I considered his question carefully. The old Sarah would have jumped at any opportunity to reconnect with her son. The new Sarah had learned to protect her emotional well-being and invest her time only in relationships that added value to her life. I'm willing to see if you're capable of that kind of relationship, I said finally. But it would start slowly, with small demonstrations of consistency and reliability. And it would continue only as long as both of us found it mutually beneficial. That sounds more like a business arrangement than a family relationship. Marcus, you taught me that. Family relationships based on assumed obligation don't work. Blood doesn't create trust or respect. Those have to be earned and maintained through actions, just like any other valuable relationship. We stood in silence for several minutes, watching the lights of Bangkok come alive as darkness settled over the city. Marcus seemed to be processing everything I had said, trying to understand how fundamentally our dynamic had changed. "Your life really is completely different now," he said finally. "Yes, it is. And I like it much better than my old life." "Even though you lost everything?" "I didn't lose everything, Marcus. I lost things that weren't serving me well. The job that was based on corporate politics rather than competence. The financial security that depended on other people's decisions. The relationships that were based on need rather than mutual respect." "And you replaced all of that?" "I built all of that from scratch, using my own skills and judgment and values. Everything I have now, I earned myself." Marcus looked at me with something that might have been admiration, though it was mixed with sadness and regret. "I'm proud of you, Mom. I know that probably doesn't mean much to you anymore, but I wanted you to know." "It means something," I admitted. "Just not what it would have meant 6 months ago." My phone buzzed with another message, this one from Charles Nguyen, a business partner in Singapore, who wanted to discuss expanding our operations into the Vietnamese market. I glanced at the message, then back at Marcus. "I need to return this call," I said. "It's about a potential partnership opportunity." "Of course. I should get back to Tom anyway. We're flying back to Portland in the morning." We looked at each other for a moment, two people connected by history but no longer bound by the assumptions that had once defined our relationship. "Marcus, if you're serious about rebuilding our relationship, you have my email address. But understand that I'm not interested in empty promises or guilt-based apologies. I'm only interested in consistent actions over time." "I understand. I hope you do." I walked back into the conference center, leaving Marcus on the terrace with his thoughts and regrets. As I found a quiet corner to return Charles's call, I reflected on how different this conversation had been from what either of us had expected. The old Sarah would have been desperate to repair the relationship, willing to accept any explanation or promise just to have her son back in her life. The new Sarah had standards and boundaries that couldn't be crossed simply because someone shared her DNA. Charles's call was about an exciting opportunity to partner with a manufacturing cooperative in Ho Chi Minh City. As we discussed logistics and timeline, I felt the familiar excitement that came from building something new and meaningful. This was what fulfillment looked like: work that mattered, relationships based on mutual respect, and the freedom to make decisions based on my own values rather than other people's expectations. Later that evening, I had dinner with David Walsh and two potential partners from Singapore. The conversation was stimulating and productive, filled with ideas about sustainable business practices and innovative approaches to international trade. These were my people now, professionals who valued competence over connections, results over rhetoric, and long-term success over short-term gains. As I walked back to my hotel through Bangkok's vibrant night streets, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I had been sleeping in a cramped guest house room, counting my last few dollars and wondering if I would ever recover from the destruction of my old life. Now I was walking through the same city as a successful business executive, respected speaker, and independent woman who had built something meaningful from the ashes of her previous existence. The transformation hadn't been magic or luck. It had been the result of hard work, clear thinking, and the willingness to let go of relationships and assumptions that were holding me back. My phone buzzed with a final message of the day. This one from Siraporn Thanawat. "Sarah, thank you for a wonderful conversation today. I'm very excited about our potential partnership. Would you be available for a planning meeting next Tuesday?" I typed back my confirmation, smiling at how dramatically our professional relationship had evolved. The woman who had once been shown the door from Thanawat Industries was now being courted as a valuable partner. But this reversal wasn't about vindication or revenge. It was simply the natural result of proving my competence and building trust through consistent action. As I reached my hotel, I realized that I had no desire to return to my old life, even if such a return were possible. The corporate executive who had measured her success by title and salary had been replaced by someone who measured success by impact and fulfillment. The mother who had defined herself through her son's needs and approval had been replaced by someone who built relationships based on mutual respect and shared values. The woman who had once believed that security came from external sources, job titles, family obligations, financial assets, now understood that real security came from internal resources, competence, resilience, adaptability, and the ability to create value wherever she found herself. Standing in the elevator heading up to my hotel room, I thought about Marcus's question. Even though you lost everything? The answer was clear now. I hadn't lost everything. I had lost everything. That was keeping me from becoming who I was meant to be, and in the process, I had gained something infinitely more valuable. The knowledge that I was capable of building a meaningful life entirely on my own terms, surrounded by people who valued me for exactly who I was, doing work that mattered in ways that extended far beyond personal advancement or financial gain. The woman who would wake up tomorrow morning in Bangkok was not the same woman who had arrived in Thailand broken and desperate 6 months earlier. She was stronger, wiser, more independent, and infinitely more content with the life she had chosen to create. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new relationships to build and maintain. But tonight, I went to sleep knowing that whatever came next, I had the skills, the courage, and the self-respect to handle it on my own terms. The girl who had once needed her son's approval to feel worthy was gone forever. In her place was a woman who had learned that the only approval that truly mattered was her own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.